Welcome to Mystery Manor Tales. I'm your host, Evelyn Whitaker. If you're new here, we dive into the world of classic whodunits, narrated just for you to unwind and puzzle along. Grab a cup of tea, settle in, and let's transport ourselves to the 1920s with the incomparable Hercule Poirot. Today, we're unraveling Hercule Poirot and the Frozen Manor murder, a tale of isolation, deception, and deadly secrets in a snowbound estate. This is a long one, over 90 minutes of intrigue, so perfect for a cozy evening. Tell me in the comments where you're listening from. I'd love to hear if it's from a snowy cabin or a bustling city. And if you enjoy, hit that like button and subscribe for more Agatha Christie-inspired stories. Now let's begin. Chapter 1. The Summons in White London, December 1925. The city wore its winter coat reluctantly. Soot-streaked snow piled along the gutters of Whitehall, and the Thames lay sullen beneath a pewter sky. Gas lamps hissed in the fog, their halos trembling whenever a motor omnibus growled past. Yet within the discreet Art Deco block of Whitehaven mansions, one apartment glowed like a small, orderly hearth against the chaos outside. Hercule Poirot, late of the Belgian police and now the most celebrated private detective in Europe, sat at his walnut bureau in a dressing gown of bottle green silk. His patent leather shoes, aligned with mathematical precision beneath the chair, caught the firelight. On the blotter before him lay the Morning Post, each envelope slit with the silver letter opener he wielded like a rapier. Bills, invitations, a perfumed note from a countess he had once saved from scandal. All were arranged in descending order of interest. At the summit rested a single square of heavy cream stock, sealed in crimson wax with the crest of a stag rampant. Poirot lifted it between manicured fingers. The paper was cold, as though it had travelled through the night in an open carriage. He turned it once, twice, noting the faint watermark of a Sussex paper mill. Only then did he break the seal. The letter unfolded with a crisp sigh. Whitehaven Mansions, London. My dear Monsieur Poirot, I find myself in a position both absurd and perilous. Rumours, vile, persistent rumours, have reached Harrington Manor that someone among my forthcoming house party intends me harm. The occasion is trivial. A weekend gathering before Christmas to toast a new venture in refrigerated transport. Yet the whispers grow louder with every frost. Roads will soon be impassable. The railway may close. If mischief is planned, the manor will become a perfect cage. You once recovered my wife's sapphires with a discretion I have never forgotten. I beg the favour again. Come tomorrow. Bring your little grey cells. I shall provide the snow. Yours in haste, Reginald Harrington. Harrington Manor, near Sepulchre, Sussex. Poirot placed the letter upon the blotter and leaned back. His moustaches, those magnificent symmetrical arcs, gave the faintest quiver of anticipation. "Eh bien," he murmured to the empty room, "a cage of snow! How very English!" He rose, crossed to the window, and drew aside the net curtain. Snowflakes drifted past the glass in slow motion, each one a minute crystal palace before it melted on the pane. Somewhere below, a newsboy shouted the day's headline, something about Arctic exploration and a new ice-breaking steamer. But Poirot heard only the soft ticking of his ormolu clock. Order, method, and a little symmetry. These were the comforts of his life. A locked manor in a blizzard promised the opposite. Irresistible. By noon the next day he was at Victoria Station, valise in the hand of his valet George, himself muffled in a camel-hair overcoat and a grey Homburg hat tilted at precisely 33 degrees. The platform for the 12:47 to Pulborough steamed like a dragon's nostril. Porters shouted, trunks thudded, and the smell of coal smoke mingled with roasted chestnuts from a barrow. Poirot inhaled once, deeply, nostalgically, before boarding the first-class carriage. The train was a Pullman beauty named the Southern Belle, all mahogany panels and green-shaded lamps. Poirot settled into a window seat, arranged his travelling rug across his knees, and accepted a cup of chocolate from the attendant. Outside, London dissolved into suburbs, then into fields already whitening under the thickening fall. Conversation in the carriage was sparse. A clergyman murmured over the church times. Two dowagers discussed the scandal of short skirts, and a young man in +4s stared moodily at the snow as though it had personally offended him. At Three Bridges, the sky lowered to a bruised violet. Snow lashed the windows horizontally. The train slowed, wheels screaming on icy rails. Poirot consulted his pocket watch, 2:30, and frowned. They were due at Pulborough by 3. Instead, the locomotive gave a mournful whistle and halted altogether in open countryside. Minutes stretched. The guard appeared, cap askew, face grim. "Apologies, ladies and gentlemen. Drift ahead at Billingshurst. We're stuck till the plough comes." A collective groan rose. The young man in +4s swore under his breath. Poirot merely closed his eyes and began, with the discipline of a monk, to order the facts he possessed. Lord Reginald Harrington, self-made magnate in the new science of refrigeration. Married to Lady Amelia, née Fortescue, whose sapphires Poirot had indeed recovered from a light-fingered maid 3 years prior. 2 children, Edward, the prodigal, and Clarissa, the beauty. Weekend guests Colonel Marcus Blackwood, late of the Punjab Frontier Force, Mr. Victor Lang, Clarissa's fiancé of mysterious continental origin, plus household staff of unknown quantity. Motive, unspecified harm. Method, unknown, opportunity, a manner shortly to be cut off by snow. The train lurched forward at 4 o'clock, inching past a gang of men with shovels. By the time Pulborough station appeared, dusk had already fallen, though it was scarcely 4:30, and the platform lamps glowed like goudow in a white sea. A solitary motor car waited, its headlamps cutting tunnels through the flurry. The chauffeur, muffled to the eyes in a balaclava, touched his cap. "Mr. Poirot, Lord Harrington's compliments. Name's Wilkins. Road's rough, but we'll manage." The car was a Rolls-Royce Silver Ghost, its bodywork dusted with snow like icing sugar. Wilkins stowed Poirot's valise, brushed the running board clear with a gloved hand, and eased the car onto a lane already half lost beneath drifts. They climbed gradually into the South Downs, the engine's note deepening as chains bit into the fresh powder. Hedgerows became ghostly walls. Signposts were mere suggestions. Once, a fox crossed their path, eyes luminous in the headlights before vanishing into the blankness. Harrington Manor revealed itself in stages, first a glow on the horizon, then gateposts topped with stone pineapples, finally the house itself, a sprawling Tudor pile of mullioned windows and chimneys exhaling plumes against the night. Every pane blazed with light, as though the building defied the storm by sheer opulence. Icicles hung from the eaves like stalactites in a frozen cave. Wilkins drew up beneath a porte-cochere where footmen in powdered wigs, yes, actual powdered wigs, a Harrington affectation, waited with lanterns. The front door, oak banded with iron, swung inward on well-oiled hinges. Warm air rolled out, scented with beeswax, wood smoke, and the faint metallic tang of 1,000 radiators. Lord Reginald Harrington filled the doorway like a genial bear. 55, florid, waistcoat straining over a stomach earned by good claret and better deals. His handshake was a vice, Poirot! By Jove, you're a sight for frostbitten eyes. Come in, leave the Arctic outside. The entrance hall soared 2 stories, its hammer-beam roof lost in shadow. A fire roared in a grate large enough to roast an ox. Suits of armour stood sentinel. Ancestral portraits glared down with the mild disapproval of the long dead. Somewhere, a clock struck 5 with the resonance of a cathedral bell. Harrington steered Poirot toward the drawing room. Amelia will be down presently. The others are gathering. Storm's a brute. Telegraph lines are down, and the village is cut off. We're marooned, old chap. Positively medieval. Poirot's eyes, bright as winter stars, took in every detail. The Persian rugs worn thin at the hearth, the faint watermark on a console table where a vase had recently overflowed. The single glove, ladies, kid leather, pale grey, dropped carelessly on a side chair. He filed each away. The drawing-room was a riot of crimson damask and gilt. A Christmas tree, already installed though Advent had barely begun, glittered with glass baubles and real candles yet unlit. Before the fire stood the house party in various attitudes of boredom or apprehension. Lady Amelia Harrington glided forward first. She was 45, but looked 35 by candlelight. Ash-blonde hair coiled beneath a bandeau of diamonds, gown of midnight velvet that shimmered like a raven's wing. Her handshake was cool, her smile practised. Monsieur Poirot, how good of you to brave the elements. Reginald has spoken of your talents. Behind her, the younger generation. Edward Harrington, 26, handsome in the careless way of those born to privilege. His evening shoes scuffed as though he had already paced every corridor twice. His eyes, bloodshot, flicked to the decanters and away again. Clarissa, 22, shared her mother's colouring but none of her poise. She twisted a sapphire engagement ring round and round her finger while staring at the stranger in their midst. Colonel Marcus Blackwood, retired, leaned upon a Malacca cane despite being only 50. His moustache was a masterpiece of the military barber. His dinner jacket strained across shoulders broadened by polo and pig-sticking. He greeted Poirot with a parade ground bark that made the crystal tremble. Victor Lang, Clarissa's fiancé, was the outlier. Slim, dark, impeccably tailored in charcoal mohair. His accent carried the soft vowels of Vienna or Budapest. Poirot could not yet place it. He bowed from the waist, clicked heels faintly, and said nothing at all. The staff completed the tableau. Mr. Graves, the butler, stood at the sideboard like a carved ebony statue. Tall, gaunt, eyes the colour of wet slate. He inclined his head a precise inch. Behind him hovered Elsie Thorne, parlour-maid, barely 20. Cheeks flushed from the kitchen's heat or from nerves. She curtsied so low, her apron brushed the carpet. Harrington clapped for attention. Now that our sleuth has arrived, let the festivities commence. Graves, the 25 Pol Roger, none of your domestic fizz tonight. Glasses were charged. Poirot accepted a coupe, but merely wet his lips. He watched the bubbles rise like tiny prisoners seeking escape. Conversation fluttered. The unreliability of motorcars in snow, the Prince of Wales's latest escapade, the price of refrigeration shares on the exchange. Beneath the chatter, Poirot detected discords. Edward's laugh too loud, Clarissa's gaze fixed on Lang, as though daring him to speak, Lady Amelia's fingers tightening on her glass whenever Blackwood's boot brushed her slipper beneath the table. At length, Harrington drew Poirot aside to a window embrasure. Snow lashed the leaded panes. Beyond, the gardens had vanished into formless white. "See here," the host muttered, producing a folded sheet from his waistcoat. "Arrived yesterday. No signature. Poirot unfolded it. Cheap paper, typed in erratic capitals. The past is not dead, it is frozen. Before the thaw. Justice. He turned the note to the light. The ribbon of the typewriter was worn. The letter E sat slightly askew. Others have received similar? Poirot asked. Amelia found one in her prayer book. Edward swears he burned his. The staff whisper of footsteps in empty corridors. I tell you, Poirot, this house is a powder keg wearing snowshoes. Poirot folded the note with geometrical care. Then we must ensure the fuse is extinguished. Tell me, monsieur, who profits if you do not see Christmas? Harrington's jovial mask slipped. Everyone, perhaps, or no one. My will is recent. Charities get the bulk if the family misbehaves. Edward's in dun territory up to his eyeballs. Clarissa's young man is opaque. Blackwood believes I ruined him in a deal. Even Graves, he stopped, glanced at the butler pouring champagne with mechanical grace. Well, old retainers harbour old wounds. A gong boomed. Dinner. The party processed to the dining room, a baronial hall of oak panelling and a table long enough for a coronation feast. Candelabra marched down the centre like soldiers of light. Place cards in spidery copperplate directed each guest. Poirot found himself between Lady Amelia and Clarissa. Excellent vantage points. Course followed course. Consommé Olga, sole in aspic, saddle of mutton with red currant jelly, a towering piece montée of spun sugar that melted poignantly under the heat of the chafing dishes. Wines flowed, hock, claret, a sauterne the colour of candle flame. Poirot ate sparingly, observed voraciously. Edward drank deeply and grew maudlin, toasting dear Papa's empire of ice with a sarcasm that made Harrington's jaw tighten. Colonel Blackwood recounted a tiger hunt in which the beast had nearly carried off the mahout. His eyes, however, never left his host. Lang spoke only when addressed. His answers polished marbles that rolled away unanswered. Elsie the maid, circulating with gravy boats, let her gaze linger on Edward whenever she thought no one noticed. At the removal of the cloth, Port and Stilton appeared. The ladies withdrew. Poirot lingered with the men over cigars. Snow tapped the windows like impatient fingers. Harrington leaned close. Tonight we lock doors early. Storm or no storm, I'll have no wandering. My study, ground floor, end of the west corridor, has a Yale lock and bolts inside. I'll work on accounts till midnight. After that, God and the snow take over. Poirot nodded. A prudent man bolts his door against more than draughts. The party broke up. Footsteps echoed on the great staircase. Doors closed along the upper gallery. Poirot was shown to the peacock room. Emerald wallpaper, a four-poster hung with silk the colour of peacock tails. A fire already laid and blazing. George had unpacked. Pyjamas pressed, slippers aligned, a small vial of tisane on the nightstand. Poirot dismissed his valet, donned a dressing gown, and stood at the window. The storm had reached its crescendo. Snow fell in sheets, erasing footprints as soon as they formed. Somewhere below, a door shut with finality. A clock struck 11. Chapter 2. The Crime Discovered. The clock in the entrance hall struck 11:30, with the solemnity of a judge's gavel. Upstairs, the house party had scattered to their rooms, like cards shuffled by an unseen hand. Doors closed along the gallery, some softly, some with the petulance of a slammed novel. In the west wing, Lord Reginald Harrington's study glowed behind its single oak door. A rectangle of amber light spilled onto the turkey runner, steady as a lighthouse beam. Harrington himself sat at the knee-hole desk, a green banker's lamp pooling gold across ledgers and correspondence. A crystal tumbler of brandy, 3 fingers, no soda, stood at his elbow, the liquid catching the light like liquid topaz. He had dismissed Graves with a curt nod at 11 sharp, insisting on privacy for a spot of bookkeeping before the wolves close in. The fire in the grate had been banked high. Logs hissed and spat, throwing shadows that danced across panelled walls lined with maps of Arctic shipping routes. A Yale lock gleamed on the inside of the door. 2 iron bolts, top and bottom, were shot home with the finality of a prison gate. At 11:45, Elsie Thorne, parlour-maid, apron still starched from dinner, passed the study on her way to the servants' stair. She carried a tray with a single cup of cocoa for Lady Amelia, who had rung for it to settle the nerves. Elsie's footsteps were soundless on the thick carpet, but she paused outside the study door. A faint sound drifted through the keyhole. The scratch of a pen, then a low chuckle, Harrington's, unmistakable. She hurried on, cheeks warm with the memory of Edward's careless wink across the dinner table. 11:55. In the Peacock Room, Poirot sat fully dressed in a wing chair, a small leather-bound notebook open on his knee. He had not touched the tisane. Instead, he listened, to the wind battering the casements, to the house settling like an old ship, to the precise tick of his travelling clock. He wrote. He underlined the last word, then closed the book. The storm outside had reached a pitch that swallowed every lesser noise. Snowflakes hurled themselves against the window panes like suicidal moths. Midnight. The clock in the hall began its 12 measured strokes. On the 5th, a scream, high roar, unmistakably Elsie's, ripped through the house. It came from the west corridor, sharp enough to slice the thickest slumber. Doors flew open along the gallery. Slippers slapped on parquet. Poirot was first down the stairs, his dressing gown flapping like a cape. Edward Harrington stumbled after in pyjamas and bare feet, hair tousled, eyes wild. Colonel Blackwood limped behind, revolver in hand. Where had that come from so quickly? Lady Amelia appeared in a negligee of peach silk, one hand pressed to her throat. Clarissa and Victor Lang followed, she clutching his arm as though it were the only solid thing in a tilting world. They converged on the study door. The amber light still glowed beneath it, but now a thin ribbon of colder air seeped out, carrying with it the scent of brandy, and something metallic, like a butcher's shop in winter. "Father!" Edward rattled the handle, locked, bolted. He threw his shoulder against the oak. It did not budge. Blackwood levelled the revolver at the lock. "Stand back, boy!" "No!" Poirot's voice cut like a blade. "We force it together, on my count, 1, 2, 3. 3 bodies slammed the door. Wood splintered around the Yale. Bolts screeched. The door gave inward with a groan. The study was a tableau of horror. Lord Reginald Harrington sat upright in his chair, head fallen forward onto the blotter. His skin was the colour of candle wax, lips blue, eyes wide and filmed with frost. Rime feathered his eyebrows and the tips of his moustache. His brandy glass had frozen solid, the liquid inside a cloudy amber prism. The fire still roared, logs blazing, heat shimmering the air. Yet the corpse was encased in a thin sheath of ice that crackled faintly as the warmer air touched it. A single droplet of water slid from his chin and pinged onto the desk like a coin. Poirot stepped forward, gloved hand extended. The cold radiating from the body was arctic. He touched the carotid, nothing. Then he noticed the footprints. A trail of wet prints leading from the hearth to the desk, each print perfectly formed, as though someone had walked barefoot through snow and into the room. but the hearthrug was dry, the windows were sealed, curtains undisturbed. The prince simply stopped at the chair. Edward retched. Lady Amelia gave a small animal sound and slid to the carpet in a rustle of silk. Clarissa buried her face in Lang's shoulder. Blackwood's revolver wavered, then lowered. Graves appeared in the doorway, immaculate in a midnight blue dressing gown, face ashen but composed. "Sir?" His voice cracked on the single word. Poirot knelt, examining the footprints. They were small, size 5, perhaps 6, narrow, high-arched, a woman's or a slight man's. The water was already evaporating, leaving faint salt-like crystals. He sniffed. A faint acrid trace beneath the brandy. Not alcohol alone. "Mon Dieu," he murmured, "the temperature in this room is 25 degrees Celsius, yet the victim is frozen as though plucked from a glacier. The door bolted from within, the windows virgin, the chimney sealed since the reign of Queen Anne. And these prints, they arrive, but do not depart." He straightened, eyes sweeping the room. The brandy decanter on the sideboard, stopper ajar, level lower than it should be. A silver ice bucket, empty, lid open, interior still frosted. On the desk beside the frozen glass, a single sheet of paper in Harrington's hand. The cold truth will out. Before the thaw. The ink was fresh, the pen still uncapped beside it. Poirot's gaze flicked to the keyhole. No string, no trick. He tested the bolts. Solid iron, no give. The Yale lock was engaged. The key lay on the inside of the door, exactly where a man bolting himself in would leave it. Elsie, recovered enough to speak, whispered from the doorway, "I passed at 11:45, sir. He was alive, writing. I heard him laugh." Blackwood growled. Then how the devil did the killer get in and out? And why freeze the poor beggar in a furnace? Poirot did not answer. He was staring at the ice bucket. A single cube, perfect, square, untouched by the room's heat, lay on the carpet beneath the sideboard, as though it had rolled there and refused to melt. Chapter 3. The first frost of inquiry dawn arrived late, a sullen grey smudge behind the curtains of snow. The manor's radiators clanked like old bones, but the west corridor remained a crypt. Lord Harrington's body had been carried to the billiard-room, laid on the green baize beneath a chandelier that dripped wax like tears, and the study door stood ajar, exhaling cold. Poirot descended the grand staircase at 7:30 precise, dressed in a charcoal three-piece suit, spats gleaming. His moustaches were waxed to lethal points. His eyes, bright as a stoat's, missed nothing. In the entrance hall, Constable Hargreaves, summoned by the last working telephone before the lines fell, stamped snow from his boots. A burly man with a walrus moustache, and the resigned air of one who had skied 3 miles for a corpse. "Morning, sir," he greeted Poirot. "Dr. Meadows is on his way, but the drifts are chest high. Maybe noon before he arrives. In the meantime, I've secured the scene." Poirot inclined his head. "You have done well, mon ami, but the scene, it secures itself. Come." They entered the study together. The fire had burned to embers. The room's warmth had returned, yet a chill lingered like a ghost. The wet footprints had evaporated, leaving faint white rings on the parquet. Salt, Poirot noted, not water. He knelt, touched one ring with a gloved finger, tasted it. Sodium chloride, curious. Hargreaves produced a notebook the size of a hymn book. Time of death between 11:45 and 12:15, by the maid's account. Door bolted inside, windows latched, chimney bricked up since 1897. No signs of forced entry. Body temperature. He consulted a thermometer reading taken at 3 a.m. -4 degrees Celsius. In a room at 25. Doctor'll confirm, but I've never seen the like." Poirot's gaze swept the desk. The frozen brandy glass had been removed to a side table. The amber prism inside was beginning to sweat. The note, "The cold truth will out," lay beneath a paperweight shaped like an iceberg. Poirot lifted it with tweezers, turned it to the light. The paper was Manor stationery, but the ink, he sniffed delicately. Not the usual Waterman's, a cheaper brand, and the pen? He examined the fountain pen beside the blotter. Mont Blanc, gold nib, but the sack is nearly empty. Someone wrote hastily. He moved to the ice bucket. The single cube had melted into a puddle. Poirot dabbed it with blotting paper, held it to his nose. Brandy, yes, and something else. Bitter almonds? Cyanide, perhaps. But cyanide did not freeze a man. Hargreaves cleared his throat. "Households gathered in the morning room, sir. Butlers serving coffee. Strong stuff. Says they'll need it." Poirot smiled without humour. "Coffee is the English solution to every crisis. Let us join them." The morning room overlooked the terrace, now a white sea. Snow had drifted against the French windows, to the height of a man's waist. The suspect sat in a loose circle, steam curling from spode cups. Lady Amelia, veiled in black, clutched a rosary. Edward nursed a brandy despite the hour. Clarissa's eyes were red. Victor Lang stood behind her chair like a sentinel. Colonel Blackwood cleaned his revolver with an oily rag. Graves poured coffee with the solemnity of a priest at communion. Elsie hovered, refilling cups with trembling hands. Poirot entered without ceremony. "Mesdames, messieurs, the constable and I require your attention. One by one, if you please." He began with Lady Amelia. They repaired to the library, leather, dust, the smell of old paper and older secrets. She sat very straight, veil lifted just enough to reveal eyes swollen but dry. "Madame, your husband received threats. You found one in your prayer book?" She nodded. 3 days ago, same typing. The past is frozen. I burned it. And last night? I retired at 11, took cocoa at 11:45. Elsie brought it. I read for perhaps 20 minutes, then slept. I heard nothing until the scream. Poirot noted the faint scent of lavender water on her handkerchief. "Your marriage? It was happy?" A hesitation, infinitesimal. "Reginald was ambitious. We had our arrangements." Next, Edward. He paced before the fire, brandy sloshing. "Look here, Poirot. I argued with father about money. Everyone knows that. I owe Whites and Crockfords a packet. But murder? Dash it, I was in my room, dead to the world." "Alone?" A flush. "Yes. Well, no." Elsie slipped in for a moment. Just a good-night kiss. She left before midnight. Poirot's eyebrow arched like a drawn bow. "And you did not hear your father's door-bolt? It is opposite your own." Edward shrugged. "Storm was howling. I was 3 sheets to the wind." Clarissa and Victor Lang were interviewed together, at her insistence. She twisted her engagement ring until the skin blanched. Victor and I played bezique in the drawing room until 11:30. Then we parted at the top of the stairs. I went straight to bed. Long's voice was smooth as oiled steel. "I read in my room, Schopenhauer. The scream woke me." Poirot studied the fiancé's cuffs. Immaculate, but a single thread of crimson, silk caught in the buttonhole. "You are in the refrigeration business with Lord Harrington?" "A junior partner. His lordship was expanding into Europe." Colonel Blackwood limped in next, revolver now holstered. "Harrington ruined me in 23. A cold storage scheme in Bombay. Promised returns, delivered bankruptcy. I told him so at dinner, but I was in my room by 11, cleaning my Webley. Old habit, heard the scream, grabbed the gun, ran. Poirot noted the oil on Blackwood's fingers, the faint smell of gun solvent. You keep cyanide in your kit. From the war? Blackwood's eyes narrowed. Prussic acid ampules, yes. For emergencies, they're in my trunk. Graves entered last, back ramrod straight. I locked the silver at 11:15, checked the doors, retired to my pantry. I sleep light. Heard Miss Thorne's scream, came at once. Chapter 4. Clues and Red Herrings. By 9 o'clock the billiard room had become a morgue. Lord Harrington lay beneath a Union Jack dragged from the gun room, his frozen face turned toward the bays as though studying an impossible shot. Dr. Meadows arrived on snowshoes, beard rimed with ice, medical bag slung like a poacher's. He peeled back the flag, whistled low. Core temperature -6, rigour absent, skin blistered in patches, flash freeze, never seen it outside the Arctic. Poirot stood at the foot of the table, hands clasped behind his back. Cause? Meadows lifted the brandy glass, now thawed, the liquid cloudy. He sniffed, touched a drop to his tongue, grimaced. Prussic acid, high concentration. Enough to drop an elephant, but the freezing? He shook his head. That's not chemistry, that's witchcraft. Poirot thanked him, then dismissed everyone but Constable Hargreaves. Together they returned to the study. Sunlight, weak, winter pale, filtered through the French windows, revealing details the night had hidden. Poirot moved like a bloodhound. First, the ice bucket. He lifted the lid with a handkerchief. Inside, frost feathers curled like fern. 5 cubes remained, perfect squares, but the 6th, the one on the carpet, was missing its twin. He measured the puddle with a ruler, 3 inches across. A single cube, dropped deliberately, yet it did not melt for hours. Second, the footprints. The salt rings had crystallized into perfect circles. Poirot scraped one into an envelope. Table salt, coarse, not from the kitchens, Graves uses fine. From the ice house, perhaps, to keep paths clear. Third, the desk, the note, the cold truth will out, was not in Harrington's hand. Poirot compared it to a ledger signature. The capital T in truth had a flourish Harrington never used. Forgery, but hurried. He opened the dumbwaiter hatch beside the fireplace, a narrow shaft for coal or trays. Inside, a brass pulley glinted. A scrap of crimson silk caught on the runner, the same thread from Victor Lang's cuff. Hargreaves grunted. Hidden passage? No. The shaft drops to the pantry, too small for a man, but for ice. Poirot's eyes gleamed. They descended to the ice house, a stone hut 50 yards from the kitchen door, half buried in the drift. Inside, sawdust-insulated great blocks harvested from the lake last January. A wooden tray held loose cubes for the house. Poirot lifted one, identical to those in the study, but beneath the tray, a tin box. Inside, coarse salt, a rubber tube, and a glass syringe with a wide bore. Voila, Poirot murmured. The murder weapon is not poison alone. It is delivery. Back in the study, he reconstructed. The killer fills the syringe with liquid prussic acid, stolen from Blackwood's kit, injects it into an ice cube through a pinhole. The cube is placed in the bucket at 10:30. Harrington, alone, bolts the door, pours brandy, adds ice. The cube melts slowly. The poison releases. He drinks, collapses. But the freezing! He opened the French window. Snow had drifted against it, but the latch was unfastened from inside. A thin wire, fishing line, ran from the latch, across the sill, into the snow. Poirot followed it. 10 feet out, buried in a drift, a metal canister the size of a thermos. Inside, dry ice, packed in straw, still sublimating. A rubber tube connected to a second syringe, now empty. "The killer," Poirot said, "prepares 2 cubes, one poisoned, one hollow, filled with compressed carbon dioxide from the soda siphon. At 11:50, while the house sleeps, they open the window from outside. Wire pulls the latch. Insert the CO2 cube via a bamboo rod. The gas expands, flash freezes the room for minutes. Footprints made with salted boots, then erased by the storm. The wire is cut, the canister buried, the door remains bolted, the crime impossible." Hargreaves whistled. "But who?" Poirot returned to the morning room. The suspects had not moved. He laid the tin box on the table. Someone entered the ice house after 10:30. The padlock was picked, scratch marks. Someone knew of dry ice. Harrington's own experiments for shipping fish. Someone had access to Blackwood's kit. Edward laughed nervously. "Absurd! We were all abed." Poirot produced the crimson silk. "Monsieur Lang, this is from your cuff. You were seen near the kitchen at 11:20 by the scullery maid." Lang paled. "I fetched a glass of water." Clarissa gasped. "Victor!" But Poirot's gaze shifted to Graves. The butler's hands were red, raw from cold. "You filled the ice at 10:30, oui. But you returned. Your boots, size 6, narrow, matched the prints, and this," he held up a fountain pen, cheap, the sack empty. "From your pantry drawer, the forgery." Graves did not flinch. "I served faithfully." Poirot's voice softened. "You are his lordship's half-brother, born on the wrong side of the blanket. He promised you a legacy, then rewrote the will. You froze him as he froze you out." A red herring crumbled. But the storm had one more trick. Chapter 5. Complications and Twists. Poirot stood in the morning room, the tin box open like a Pandora of frost. Graves stared at the cheap fountain pen as though it were a loaded revolver. The others formed a frozen tableau. Edward, half risen, brandy forgotten. Lady Amelia's rosary clicking like hail. Clarissa clutching Victor Lang's sleeve as if it might vanish. "Speak, monsieur," Poirot said softly. "The footprints are yours. The pen is yours. The legacy denied is yours. Why deny the act?" Graves's shoulders sagged, but his voice remained butler smooth. "Because I did not kill him. I prepared the ice, yes. I wrote the note, on his orders. He wished to frighten the household into confession. Someone among us, he said, planned theft of his new patent, a vacuum-sealed freezer chest. The threats were theatre. I was his instrument, nothing more." A collective exhale. Edward barked a laugh that died in his throat. Father staging his own murder? Typical. Poirot's eyes narrowed. "Then the footprints were mine," Graves continued, "but at 11:15. I returned to the study with fresh ledgers. His lordship was alive, laughing at the prank. I left by the door, bolted it after me at his request. The salted prints were from the ice-house path. My boots were wet. Someone else used the window later." Poirot whirled to the French windows. The wire he had found earlier, cut clean, but now, in daylight, a second wire glinted, finer, almost invisible, running from the latch to a brass eyelet newly screwed into the sill. He followed it outside. The snow had preserved a shallow trench. The wire had been pulled taut, then released. At the trench's end, a child's sled, red, wooden, half-buried. On its runners, traces of dry ice sublimated into ghostly patterns. "Mon Dieu," Poirot breathed. "A delivery system. The killer did not enter, the ice entered." Back inside, he demonstrated. The sled, pulled by the wire, could slide a small package, dry ice wrapped in oilskin, through the gap in the window. A second wire triggered a tiny bellows, dispersing CO2 gas. The room flash-froze for 90 seconds. Footprints, made by a pair of ladies' galoshes lined with salt, tossed onto the sled and retrieved the same way. The pinhole in the ice cube? Injected earlier in the ice house, while Graves was distracted. But the poison, Hargreaves objected, cyanide in the glass, was in the cube, Poirot finished. The cube melted last. Harrington drank, collapsed, died. The gas froze him posthumously. The perfect locked room illusion. Clarissa gave a small, strangled sound. Then anyone could have... No. Poirot produced a scrap of oilskin from the sled. Monogrammed. VL. Monsieur Lang, this is from your cigarette case lining. You were seen near the ice house at 11:25 by the scullery. Made. Again. Lang's composure cracked. I lost the case yesterday. Anyone could have taken it. Poirot's gaze shifted to Colonel Blackwood. Your cyanide ampules, one missing. Your war trunk unlocked. You blamed Harrington for bankruptcy, yet your club bills are paid. By whom? Blackwood flushed crimson. None of your damned business. Lady Amelia rose, veil fluttering. Enough. I paid them. Marcus and I. She stopped, glanced at her children. We were lovers years ago. Reginald discovered it last month. Threatened to expose us, ruin Marcus's pension. I begged him to stop. Edward stared at his mother as though seeing her for the first time. You? With him? Clarissa whispered. And Victor. Lang stepped forward, hands open. I am not your fiancée, Clarissa. I am an investigator, hired by your father to uncover the patent thief. The engagement was cover. I found the oilskin in the ice house this morning, planted to frame me. Poirot clapped once, sharp as a gunshot. Alors, 3 motives collapse into one. The patent, worth millions. Someone in this room planned to sell it to a German consortium. The threats were real, to flush the traitor. Harrington's prank backfired. He turned to Graves. You knew of the patent? Graves nodded. His lordship trusted me. The plans were in the safe. Combination his wedding date. I saw Edward photographing them last week. Edward bolted for the door. Blackwood's cane tripped him. He sprawled across the rug. I needed the money. The Germans offered 50,000. Father would have disinherited me anyway. Chapter 6. The revelation Poirot stood in the gun room, the acrid bite of cordite still hanging in the air. Victor Lang leaned against the wall, revolver dangling, eyes fixed on the rope ladder swaying outside the window like a hanged man's noose. Snow poured through the open casement, dusting the Persian rug in bridal white. "Close it," Poirot ordered. Hargreaves slammed the window. The ladder vanished into the storm. Lang's voice was hoarse. He was here for the plans. White camouflage, ice axe, German accent. I fired to warn, not to kill. Poirot took the revolver, sniffed the barrel. One shot. He examined the ceiling plaster. A neat hole, no ricochet. A warning, oui, but to whom? He led the way to the morning room. The suspects had not scattered. Fear had nailed them to their chairs. Graves stood by the door, hands clasped like a mourner. Poirot placed the burnt blueprint fragment on the table. Mesdames, messieurs, the patent is destroyed. The German agent flees empty-handed. Yet Lord Harrington is dead. Why? Silence. The fire crackled, indifferent. Poirot began to pace, slow as a pendulum. We have a locked room, a frozen corpse, a poisoned cube, a sled of dry ice, salted footprints, forged notes, stolen cyanide, a ladder from the roof. A symphony of complication. But the score is simple. One hand wrote every note. He stopped before Edward. You photographed the plans. You seduced Elsie for access. You sold your birthright for 50,000 marks. But you did not kill. You were in your room, drunk when the scream came. Edward nodded, sullen. To Lady Amelia and Blackwood. You conspired to silence a scandal. You paid debts, whispered in corridors. But you were together in her room when the shot rang out. Alibi mutual. Amelia's rosary stilled. To Lang, you are innocent of murder, though guilty of deception. The oil skin was planted on the sled after you lost your case. You fired to protect Clarissa, not to stage a phantom. Lang inclined his head. Poirot turned to Graves. You are the pivot. Half-brother, confidant, forger of threats at Harrington's command. You filled the ice, knew the combination, saw the plans burn. You claim you left the study at 11:15, the door bolted after you. Yet the salted prints were fresh at midnight. How? Graves met his gaze, steady. I returned at 11:50. His lordship rang for a fresh ledger. I entered by the door. He unbolted it himself, delivered the book, left the same way. He bolted again, I swear it. Poirot's eyes flicked to Elsie. The maid stood in the doorway, apron twisted in her hands. You, mademoiselle, you brought cocoa to Lady Amelia at 11:45. You passed the study at 11:50. You heard laughter. Then what? Elsie's voice trembled. I went to the kitchen. Edward had asked me to leave the side door on the latch. I did. Then I waited in the pantry. Poirot pounced. Waited for whom? She burst into tears. For no one. I fell asleep. When the scream came, I ran. Poirot produced a small key from his waistcoat. This opened the icehouse padlock, found in your apron pocket this morning. You let someone in. Elsie collapsed. It was Clarissa. She came to me at 11:30, begging to speak to Edward alone. I gave her my key. She said it was about the engagement. Clarissa rose, pale as the snow outside. Lies. I was in my room. Poirot's voice softened, deadly. No, mademoiselle. You were seen by the boot boy, climbing the back stair at 11:55. Boots wet, scarf iced. You went to the ice house. You prepared the sled, the gas, the poison. You knew the patent was worthless. Your father told you that afternoon. But you needed the world to believe it priceless, to cover your own theft. Clarissa laughed, high and brittle. Absurd! Why would I? Because, Poirot said, you are not Clarissa Harrington. You are Clarissa Lang, Victor's sister. The real Clarissa died of fever in Vienna last year. You took her place, her ring, her life, to infiltrate the manor and steal the patent for the Germans. Victor discovered the switch too late. He played along to protect you both. But when Harrington burned the plans, you panicked. You killed him to create chaos, to buy time for your accomplice, outside to retrieve the stolen copy you planted in the safe. He opened the safe again. Beneath the false bottom, a second set of plans, pristine. These are forgeries. The ink is fresh, the paper Austrian. You substituted them yesterday, intending the German to find them after the murder. But Harrington suspected. He confronted you in the study at 11:50. You injected the cube earlier, left via the door. He bolted it after, thinking you a thief, not a killer. Then, from the ice house, you triggered the sled. The gas, the freeze, the footprints, all remote. The ladder was your escape after the shot. Lang fired to give you cover. Clarissa lunged for the window. Blackwood's cane hooked her ankle. She fell. Hargreaves snapped on cuffs. Poirot knelt beside her. The real Clarissa's locket, inside the lining of your travelling case. A photograph of your brother. The scar on your left shoulder. From the fever, not a childhood fall. And the typewriter ribbon in your room, worn E, matches the threats. She spat. He deserved it. He mocked us, called us parasites. Poirot stood. Justice is not vengeance, mademoiselle. It is order. The storm chose that moment to ease. A shaft of sunlight pierced the clouds, striking the chandelier into 1,000 shards of rainbow. Outside, the German agent lay face down in a drift, felled by Lang's bullet after all, dead before he could flee. Chapter 7. Justice Served. The morning room had become a courtroom. Sunlight, thin but honest, poured through the French windows and struck the chandelier into trembling prisms. Constable Hargreaves stood at the door, helmet tucked beneath one arm, notebook open like a hymnal. Fräulein Lang, sat cuffed to a spindle chair, wrists raw, eyes defiant. The others formed a ragged semicircle. Lady Amelia veiled and trembling, Edward pale with hangover and shame, Colonel Blackwood rigid as a dress uniform, Graves impassive beside the coffee tray he would never pour again. Victor Lang stood apart, face unreadable, the locket of his real sister clenched in his fist. Poirot took centre stage, small and immaculate, voice gentle as falling ash. Mesdames, messieurs, the law will speak, but first the truth must have its say. Fräulein Lang, you have confessed in spirit, if not in words. Let us complete the picture. He laid the evidence on the table like a hand of patience. Poirot lifted the galoche. You wore these over your stockings. You walked the icehouse path at 11:50, prepared the sled, injected the cube with cyanide stolen from the colonel's trunk, ampule broken in the snow to hide the theft. You left via the side door Elsie held for Edward's rendezvous, unaware she aided murder. Clarissa spat. He mocked us, called us continental Schwärmer, said the patent would stay English. I gave him English ice. Poirot turned to Victor. You discovered the switch in Vienna. The real Clarissa's death. Typhus, not fever. You came to protect the family, then to protect your sister. You fired the shot to create chaos, to let her climb the ladder and vanish with the forged plans. But the snow betrayed you both. Victor's voice was hollow. She is all I have. Hargreaves cleared his throat. German agent's body is in the stables. A bullet in the back, Lang's revolver. Self-defense, likely, but we'll need the inquest. Poirot nodded. The agent was Herr Klaus Becker, known to Interpol. He followed the forged plans sent. Fräulein Lang signalled him with the ladder at midnight. When Harrington burned the true patent, she improvised murder to buy time. He faced Lady Amelia. Madame, your affair with the Colonel, irrelevant to the crime, but it clouded judgment. You paid his debts to keep him silent, not to kill. Amelia whispered, Reginald forgave nothing. To Edward, you sold photographs of a patent already obsolete. Your father rewrote it months ago. The Germans bought smoke. Edward laughed, bitter. Figures. To Graves, you forged the threats at his lordship's command, yes. But you also burned the true plans in the study fire at 11:55, as he instructed, after Clarissa left. You are innocent of murder, guilty only of loyalty. Graves inclined his head, the ghost of a smile. Poirot addressed Elsie last. You opened the door for love. Love blinds, but it does not kill. You will testify. Elsie nodded, tears freezing on her lashes. Hargreaves stepped forward. Fräulein Lang, you'll come with me to Pulborough when the plough's clear. Murder, conspiracy, espionage. Scotland Yard will want a word. Mr. Lang, accessory after the fact. The rest of you, statements, then home when the road's open. Clarissa lunged, cuffs rattling. Victor! Her brother did not move. The locket slipped from his fingers, clattered across the parquet, spun to rest at Poirot's feet. He picked it up, closed it gently. Outside, the snow had stopped. Drifts glittered like diamond dust under a pale sun. The manor's chimneys exhaled their last plumes. Icicles wept in steady drips. Footprints, real ones, crisscrossed the terrace. Hargreaves's skis, the doctor's snowshoes, the German's final stagger. Poirot opened the front door. A motor plough growled in the distance, blade flashing. He turned to the household. The thaw comes, with it life. Lord Harrington's true legacy was not steel and ice, but the family he tried to protect, even from itself. Remember that. Lady Amelia approached. Veil lifted. "Will we hang?" Poirot's eyes softened. "Justice is not vengeance, madame. The courts will decide, but you will live with the cold truth." He stepped onto the porte-cochere. Wilkins had the rolls idling, exhaust pluming like dragon's breath. Poirot paused, looked back at the manor, its windows now merely glass, its shadows merely shade. Graves appeared with his valise. "Sir, the peacock room is stripped. Your tisane is packed." Poirot smiled. "You will manage the estate until the will is read, mon ami. The charities will thrive. And you, perhaps a small cottage in the village. Loyalty deserves warmth." Graves bowed, eyes suspiciously bright. The rolls crunched down the drive, chains biting fresh snow. In the rearview mirror, Harrington Manor shrank Chapter 8, The Thaw, 1 year later, December 1926. The South Downs wore a thinner coat of snow, and Harrington Manor, now the Harrington Trust, stood open to the wind. Its chimneys no longer smoked for pleasure. They vented the new refrigeration laboratories built in the West Wing. Orphans from the Great War learned engineering among the ice machines, their laughter echoing where threats once whispered. Poirot had returned only once, at the invitation of the new custodian. Mr. Graves, no longer butler but trustee, waistcoat replaced by a sensible tweed. The will, probated in spring, had surprised no one. The bulk to medical charities, the house to science, a modest annuity to Amelia, a stern codicil disinheriting Edward unless he mended his ways within the year. He had, barely, taken a post in Canada with a timber firm, writing monthly letters full of contrite lumber measurements. Lady Amelia lived in the dower house, a widow in lavender, tending roses that refused to die. Colonel Blackwood had vanished to Kenya with a widow of his own. Postcards arrived depicting zebras and terse regrets. Elsie married the boot boy, now head gardener, and pushed a pram beneath the yews, where once a sled had glided murderously. Victor Lang stood trial in the spring. Accessory reduced to obstruction. Sentence suspended. He vanished eastward, Vienna, then Shanghai, carrying the locket and a silence heavier than chains. Clarissa Lang, true name Katharina von Hohenfels, faced the rope at Pentonville on a grey March morning. Her last words, reported by the News of the World, were in German. Hat das Eis verdient. He deserved the ice. Poirot arrived on the anniversary of the murder, the 1247 from Victoria, once more delayed by frost. Graves met him at the door. No powdered footman now, just a single maid in sensible grey. The entrance hall smelled of carbolic and chalk. Blackboards lined the walls where ancestral portraits once glowered. "Welcome, monsieur," Graves said, voice softer without the starch. "The children call this the Ice Palace. They've no idea." Poirot's eyes twinkled. Better they learn thermodynamics than thermodramatics. They walked the west corridor. The study, now a lecture theatre, retained its oak panelling, but the desk was gone, replaced by a demonstration freezer humming like a beehive. Graves opened it. Inside, a single brandy glass frosted, sealed in a perspex case labelled Exhibit A, The Impossible Crime. "A teaching aid," Graves explained. "The students reconstruct your solution every term. They argue for hours about the sled." Poirot touched the case. "And the real sled? Chopped for kindling. Some ghosts burn cleaner than others." They took tea in the morning room, now the trustee's office. Sunlight slanted through the French windows, where once a wire had pulled death across the snow. Graves poured from a pot that did not shake. "The patent?" Poirot asked. "Rebuilt from Harrington's notebooks. Your recovery of the ashes was key. We ship insulated fish to Bombay now. Profits fund the orphanage." He hesitated. "There is one more thing." He produced a small parcel wrapped in brown paper, postmarked Vienna. Inside, a child's mitten, crimson wool, monogrammed CL, and a letter in spidery German. "Herr Poirot. She knitted this in her cell, said the manor's cold followed her. Forgive the intrusion, burn it if you wish." Poirot turned the mitten in his hands. A single ice crystal, impossible, preserved, glinted in the thumb. That evening, the orphans gathered in the great hall for carols. Poirot stood at the back, half hidden by the Christmas tree, real candles again, but watched by a fire marshal. A boy of 10, freckled and solemn, sang in the bleak midwinter, with a voice clear as glacier water. When he reached Snow on Snow, Poirot's eyes misted. Graves joined him. "You gave them this, monsieur. Order from chaos." Poirot shook his head. "I gave them truth. The rest was Harrington's." Outside, the last light died behind the downs. Footprints crossed the terrace. Children's boots, a gardener's clogs, the faint indent of a cane Poirot no longer needed. He stepped into the snow, breathed deep. The air smelled of pine and possibility. Chapter 9. Echoes in the Ice, November 1927. 2 years had passed since the scream shattered Harrington Manor's silence, yet the postman still delivered letters addressed to the dead. Poirot, ensconced once more in Whitehaven Mansions, opened one such envelope on a crisp autumn morning. The paper was heavy, the crest familiar. The stag rampant, now embossed in silver for the trust. "Dear Monsieur Poirot, the children thrive, the freezers hum, but a shadow lingers." A package arrived, anonymous, postmarked Prague. Inside, a reel of film and a note. The cold truth was never fully out. "Come if you can, the manor remembers." Graves Poirot's moustaches twitched. "Eh bien, the dead do not rest easy when amateurs meddle." He arrived at dusk, the rolls crunching over gravel swept clean of leaves. The manor had changed. Laboratories gleamed where drawing rooms once sulked. Children in grey uniforms chased footballs across lawns, once pristine with snow. Graves greeted him at the door. Older, lines etched deeper, but eyes sharp. "The film," Poirot said without preamble. In the former study, now a projection room, the real word to life on a portable Pathé projector. Grainy images flickered. The ice house, midnight, a figure in white camouflage rigging the sled. Not Clarissa, taller, broader. The face turned. Colonel Blackwood, unmistakable limp, Malacca cane used as a lever. Poirot froze the frame. "Impossible! He was in Kenya." Graves shook his head. "The postcards were forwarded from a Nairobi post office. He never left England." They repaired to the morning room. Tea steamed between them. Graves produced a ledger. After the trial, anomalies. Trust funds siphoned. Small amounts, clever. The German consortium never existed. It was a shell. Blackwood needed capital to flee debts in India. He faked the bankruptcy, blamed Harrington. Poirot leaned forward. He was the agent? Partially. Clarissa was his pawn. He recruited her in Vienna, promised her brother a new life. The patent theft was real, but the murder, collaborative. Blackwood prepared the dry ice. Clarissa delivered the poison. The German outside was his manservant, dressed for the part. Lang's shot killed an innocent accomplice. Poirot's eyes gleamed. The ladder, Blackwood's escape after staging the intruder. He hid in the attics, slipped out at dawn in the confusion. Graves nodded. "We found his hide, cigar ash, a flask of cyanide, enough for suicide if cornered. He left this, a second note, in Blackwood's bold hand. The tiger hunts again. Tell Poirot the freeze was mutual. Poirot stood. He returns for the Trust's profits. Where? The ice house. Renovated, but the old blocks remain, harvested before the murder. He's sentimental, perhaps. They crossed the terrace under a hunter's moon. The ice house door hung ajar, breath of cold exhaling. Inside, sawdust muffled their steps. Blocks loomed like tombstones. A shadow detached from the wall. Blackwood, older, gaunt, revolver steady. Poirot! Graves, persistent bastards! Poirot raised a hand. Colonel, the game ends. Blackwood laughed, rasping. Harrington ruined me first, stole my formula, claimed it his. I came for revenge, found opportunity. Clarissa was eager. The girl hated her father for abandoning her real one in the war. Graves whispered, You used us all? Blackwood's eyes flicked to the door. The money's wired to Switzerland. 1 bullet each, and I vanish. Poirot stepped closer. No, you vanish anyway. But first, the full truth. The footprints were yours, salted to mimic a woman's. You injected the cube in the afternoon, hid in the dumbwaiter shaft till midnight. Clarissa signalled from her window. You triggered the sled remotely with a clockwork mechanism from your war kit. The gas canister, yours. She took the blame to protect you. You promised her freedom. Blackwood's revolver wavered. Clever Belgian, but she hanged anyway. Poirot's voice hardened. Because you abandoned her, as Harrington abandoned you. The Colonel's face crumpled. He was my brother-in-law, married my sister Amelia before the war. She died in childbirth. He kept the child, Clarissa, as his own. I came for my niece, found a thief, Graves gasped. Lady Amelia's brother. Blackwood nodded. She knew, paid my debts to keep me away. When Harrington cut her from the will, she begged me to scare him. I escalated. Poirot produced handcuffs, borrowed from Hargreaves, now retired nearby. The police wait outside. Surrender, and your story saves Amelia further shame. Blackwood lowered the gun. Too late for that. He raised a vial to his lips. Cyanide. Poirot lunged, but Graves was faster, knocking it away. The Colonel slumped, weeping. The cold, it gets in the bones. Handcuffed and led away under moonlight, Blackwood's final words. Tell the children, ice preserves, but it also kills. Back in the manor, Poirot and Graves shared a silent brandy, thawed, room temperature. The trust is safe, Graves said. Blackwood's accounts frozen, literally, by injunction. Poirot raised his glass. To truths that outlast the frost. He departed at dawn, the manor behind him a beacon of light amid the downs. In his notebook, a final entry. Twist. The Colonel was family, the revenge filial. Case truly closed, order restored. The train to London carried him home, leaves swirling like confetti in his wake. Chapter 10. The Final Thaw Spring. 1928. The South Downs bloomed with defiant green, and Harrington Manor, now officially the Harrington Institute for Cryogenic Research, stood proud beneath a sky washed clean. Children in grey smocks chased butterflies, where once a sled had carried death. The ice house had been converted into a cold storage library. Blueprints lined the walls like sacred texts, each annotated in Poirot's neat continental hand. Poirot returned one last time, not by invitation, but by summons of the heart. A letter from Graves, forwarded from Whitehaven Mansions, had arrived on April Fool's morning. Monsieur, the Colonel died in Wormwood Scrubs, heart, they say. Left a confession and a bequest. The children ask for the little Belgian with the moustaches. Come close the circle. The rolls purred up the drive at tea time, chains long discarded. Graves, now Director Graves, spectacles perched on a wiser nose, met him beneath the porte-cochere. No footman, no powdered wigs, just the smell of fresh bread from the new bakery and the laughter of 30 orphans. "They've named the main lab after you," Graves said, leading him inside. "Poirot Hall! The students think it's a joke." Poirot's eyes twinkled. "Order is never a joke, mon ami." They walked the west corridor. The former study, now a sunlit lecture theatre, hummed with adolescent voices. A chalkboard bore the equation for sublimation. Beneath it, a brass plaque, in memory of Hercule Poirot, who proved that even the impossible obeys the laws of nature. Poirot touched it, moustaches quivering. Premature, perhaps. In the morning room, now the trustee's library, tea awaited on a table once, stained with brandy and blood. Graves poured from a pot that steamed like forgiveness. "Blackwood's confession," he said, sliding a folder across. "He orchestrated everything. Clarissa was his niece, Amelia's daughter by a pre-war liaison. Harrington raised her as his own to hide the scandal. Blackwood returned from India to claim her dowry. Found Harrington rewriting the will to exclude continental entanglements. He recruited Clarissa, promised her a title in Austria. The patent was bait, the murder revenge," Poirot sipped. "And the bequest?" Graves opened a small cedar box. Inside, a medal, the military cross Blackwood's own, and a check for $10,000 made out to the Institute. He wrote, "For the children I never had. Let them build, not destroy." Poirot closed the box. Redemption is a slow thaw. They stepped onto the terrace. The gardens had been replanted, roses where icicles once hung, a croquet lawn where footprints had vanished. Lady Amelia, grey now but serene, sat on a bench with Elsie, both pushing prams. The babies gurgled, fat fists waving. Amelia rose. "Monsieur Poirot, I owe you everything. The truth freed me. Edward writes from Canada. He's sober, married, a father, the timber pays." Poirot bowed. "Truth is the only legacy that multiplies, madame." Graves led him to the icehouse library. Shelves groaned with patents, journals, a single glass case preserving the infamous sled, now labelled Exhibit Z, the vehicle of deception. A plaque beneath read, "The cold truth will out." A group of older students gathered round a demonstration freezer. One, a girl with Clarissa's dark eyes but none of her venom, adjusted a dial. Frost bloomed on a rose inside, then melted as the temperature rose. "See," she said to her classmates, "order from chaos, just like Monsieur Poirot taught." Poirot watched from the doorway, unseen. Graves murmured, "They study your cases as parables. The locked room, the sled, the salted prince, textbook now." Poirot smiled. "Better textbooks than tombstones." Evening fell soft. The orphans gathered in the great hall for supper. Long tables, steaming shepherd's pie, laughter louder than any storm. Poirot sat at the head, a small figure among giants of the future. A boy carved him the first slice. A girl offered bread still warm from the oven. After, Graves walked him to the rolls. The sky was a bowl of stars. The downs breathed pine and earth. "One last thing," Graves said, producing a tiny parcel. Inside, a wax cylinder, the kind used in early phonographs, found in Blackwood's cell. He recorded it the night before he died. Back in London, Poirot played it on his gramophone. The Colonel's voice, cracked but steady. "Poirot, if you hear this, I'm gone. Tell the children, revenge is a fire that consumes the holder. Harrington was wrong, but so was I. Let them build refrigerators, not coffins. And tell Graves, thank you for the brandy that night. It was the warmest I ever tasted." The needle lifted. Silence filled Whitehaven mansions, broken only by the tick of the ormolu clock. Poirot opened his notebook to the final page. He wrote, case eternally closed. Motive, family. Method, ice, moral. Warmth endures. He closed the book, placed the cylinder beside the tisane, and drew the curtains. Outside, London slept beneath a frost that would melt by morning,